Hey, what's going on, gang? This is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel. And this week we are talking about why, even today in the 21st century, why we still need true, honest-to-God freedom of religion. If you mention the First Amendment today, most people are probably going to gravitate towards freedom of speech or freedom of the press, because those two rights are the rights that have been claimed by either side of the political divide today. The right with freedom of speech and the left with freedom of the press. But freedom of religion is more often than not regulated to the sidelines, even though it is the first right listed in the First Amendment. And the reason why freedom of religion is more often than not forgotten is probably because people in the United States and in the West in general are becoming less and less religious. And this in turn might be why the freedom of religion is actually more and more coming under direct attack. This was actually the highlight of CNN's recent LGBTQ town hall for all the Democratic presidential candidates. In front of the whole country, former Congressman and presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke said,
"Do you think religious institutions like colleges, churches, charities, should they lose their tax-exempt status if they oppose same-sex marriage?"
Yes. There can be no reward, no benefit, no tax break for anyone or any institution, any organization in America that denies the full human rights and the full civil rights of every single one of us. And so as president, we're going to make that a priority, and we are going to stop those who are infringing upon the human rights of our fellow Americans.
Beto later expanded this to also include synagogues and mosques, so credit where it's due, his anti-religious stance is at least equal opportunity. And it is an anti-religious stance, have no doubts about that. Over at the Washington Examiner, Brad Palambo explained that a church having its tax-exempt status revoked would be the equivalent of a death sentence, which would lead to thousands of churches either closing their doors or being forced to change their beliefs at the command of the government. And since tax exemption is supposed to be based on an organization's nonprofit status and not on their beliefs, this all boils down to religious persecution. Financial, soft-gloved persecution, true, but religious persecution nonetheless. And Beto's promise is just the most recent in a long line of attacks against religious liberty. Remember Amber Geiger? She was the Dallas cop who was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison for killing Botham Jean in his own apartment. Her verdict received national attention because at her sentencing, Botham Jean's brother took the opportunity to say that he forgave her, didn't want to see her go to jail, and said that he hoped that she found healing and peace through Jesus. Everyone praised the young man's Christian charity, and they were completely right to do so. But the story wasn't quite over yet. Moved by his example, Judge Tammy Kemp went to her office, got out one of her own personal Bibles, gave it to Geiger, told her to start with the Gospel of John, and then said to her, quote, "You haven't done as much as you think you have, and you can be forgiven." In a sane world, Judge Kemp's gift would be a Kodiak moment for humanity in the justice system, proof that real love is stronger than hate, and that justice can be mixed with mercy, and a story about how people can change their lives around, that there is hope even after committing a terrible crime. But a sane world wouldn't have the Freedom from Religion Foundation, an atheist agnostic group that has as its mission the hunting down of what it sees to be even the slightest infraction against the separation of church and state. The FFRC sent a formal letter of complaint to the state's Commission on Judicial Conduct, saying that Kemp's gift and her words of hope were inappropriate, unconstitutional, and overstepped judicial authority, and it demonstrated that she is partial to notions of Christian reform and forgiveness.
What a load of rubbish!
Now, to be clear, this happened after the trial and after the sentencing. This was the denouement of the entire process. But because a judge actually displayed some Christian charity towards a woman whose life had been ruined by her own fault, she was turned into the villain. And it's not just here in America. At the beginning of October, it was reported from the UK that Dr. David McCarriff, who was fired from his job in the Department of Work and Pensions back in July, that he had lost his appeal. His crime? Because of his Christian faith, he told his superiors that it would be impossible for him to, quote, call any 6-foot bearded man madam on his whim. And I need to stress here that McCareth hadn't refused to call a transgender client by his preferred pronouns. All he did was fail a hypothetical where he said because of his Christian faith, it would be impossible for him to call a man a woman or vice versa. And for failing that hypothetical, he was fired. The UK court that actually turned down his appeal went even further and said, quote, "A lack of belief in transgenderism and conscientious objection to transgenderism, in our judgment, are incompatible with human dignity and conflict with the fundamental rights of others," unquote. Translation: Christianity, which very clearly teaches that mankind is divided into male and female, is opposed to human dignity, which means, if we follow the natural progression of logic from this thought, that Christianity must be expunged from the public square in order for human dignity to remain standing unopposed. Now, first and foremost, all of these attacks against Christianity and religion in general are attacks on the natural right of freedom of religion, the first and the most important natural right that we have. That's right, I said it. The natural right of freedom of religion is more important than freedom of speech, freedom of the press, or the right to bear arms. Nate, how can you say that? We need freedom of speech so that we can have freedom of thought. We need freedom of the press so that we can uphold democracy. And the right to bear arms is what guarantees all the other rights. Those are obviously way more important than the right that just lets you decide which church you're going to go to, or if you're even going to go to church or not. Well, that's not me saying that freedom of religion is the most important right. That would actually be James Madison, the father of the US Constitution. In his Memorial and Remonstrances Against Religious Assessments, which he wrote in 1785, Madison laid out the argument for why freedom of religion is a natural right and why it's the most important of all the natural rights. Madison made the argument that religion is the duty that we owe our Creator, as well as the means of fulfilling that duty, which means that it can only be found and directed by reason and conviction. Force doesn't work here at all, which means that religion can only be left to a person's conviction and to his conscience. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't go out and try to convince someone that their religion is incorrect or incomplete. Religion isn't such a private thing that it's completely untouchable by any other person. It just means that you have to go out and you have to make arguments that touch people's minds as well as their imaginations. You can't hold a gun to someone's head, force them to convert, and then go home thinking that your job has been well done. But Madison actually went on, saying that what is a right for man is actually a duty towards God, a duty, quote, that is precedent both in order of time and in degree of obligation to the claims of civil society, unquote. I.e., it's the right that comes before all other rights. And the reason why this right comes before all other natural, political, and civil rights is because, as Madison also says, before a person becomes a member of society, he is a quote-unquote subject of the governor of the universe. In other words, since God and not society makes a man, a person's first duty and obligations are towards God and not to society. The fact that freedom of religion is the first and greatest of the natural rights would be reason enough why attacks against it here in the US, in the UK, and in other parts of the world are wrong intrinsically. But there are additional reasons as well. First, religion is one of the only sure ways of making sure that the inherent dignity of each person in society is recognized. To use one example, it was the theology and system of Christianity that taught the ancient world that women and children were actually full and equal human persons, and not simply sex objects, as Kyle Harper has argued. Before Christianity, the ancient world saw sex as being about as mundane as hunger. It was just another appetite that had to be fulfilled. And if you were lower on the social scale than the Don Juan who was chasing you, no not only didn't mean no, no wasn't even in your vocabulary. But then Christianity came onto the stage and said that sex was actually more than that. It was actually a sacred union because the body wasn't just matter, and it wasn't just a vehicle for the real you, your soul. It was a temple of the Holy Spirit, to use St. Paul's terminology. And that meant that the bodies of all people, regardless of family, rank, social standing, had dignity and worth because all were equally created by God. Women and children then were not simply objects to be used. They were real people. This is also, not coincidentally, why Christianity stopped the Greek and Roman practice of abandonment, where a baby was actually thrown outside of the city to die because he suffered some sort of physical malady, or because the baby was actually a girl, because, hate to break it to you, but in the ancient world, boys were more valuable than girls. Without a religious foundation which recognizes the transcendent element in reality, what is the basis for human dignity? Is it reason? Well, what happens when reason doesn't seem to be there, like in the unborn? Or when reason is broken, like in a person who has Down syndrome? Well, we already know what happens. Is it from the simple fact that we're all human persons? But this begs the question, what is the essence of a human person? Is it something that doesn't exist, but it's just a convenient and good lie so that we'll treat each other respectfully? But if that's the case, then eventually people are going to see through the lie, and when that happens, there's no reason why some people shouldn't lord it over the rest of us, especially if they happen to be more powerful. To go a step further, religion is the only way that someone can actually seek out the true, the good, and the beautiful. The three transcendentals that everyone wants, that everyone needs, the three things which we can never get enough of, and which we are all seeking, whether we even realize it or not. We all probably have our own personal stories about how chasing after money or sex or some form of escape or excitement, whether that's daredevil stunts, gambling, or drugs, is all fun and good. And we believe the culture when it tells us that, hey, if we have these things, we're going to be happy. And then we get these things, we have them for our own, and then, guess what? We're still not satisfied. And in fact, the more that we chase after those things, like money or sex or drugs or thrills and highs, the less and less they are actually able to satisfy us. The more of those things we need to attain the same level of satisfaction. The only three things that actually keep their power, no matter how much of them that we have, are those three transcendentals. Think of the feeling you get looking at a Gothic cathedral or a Norman Rockwell painting or a sunset over the Pacific Ocean. Think of the glow you have after you've helped someone, whether that's a homeless man on the corner or an old woman who needs a tire changed. Think of the happiness and the illumination you have after solving a problem and knowing that you have the truth, whether that's to a mathematical equation, a scientific equation, or to a moral problem. These are the good things that our inner selves desperately want above all else. And these are the things that actually are pushing us and driving us forward in our lives. Again, whether we realize it or not. And religion is the only thing that can lead us to the true, the good, and the beautiful, because religion gives us an objective standard. And religion is the only real way towards the true, the good, and the beautiful, because religion is the only way where we can have an objective standard to measure where we are, what we're doing, and what we're seeking. Without that objective standard, we'd be able to say that anything and everything that we're doing and looking for is true, good, and beautiful. We'd be able to lie to ourselves much more easily. But with that objective standard, with the measuring stick that is religion, we can actually compare our actions and what we're seeking to what religion says we should be doing and what we should be seeking. Maybe though you're not particularly religious, maybe you don't even like religion, so it doesn't matter what the UK or the US does with religion. I mean, it's not going to affect you, right? Well, yes. Yes, it will. Religion is the most intimate relationship that a person can have because it's what unites him with the Creator, with the unmoved mover, with the source of goodness itself. If the government can barge in and basically change that relationship on a whim, for whatever reason, the government will have taken upon itself a huge amount of power. And if the government now has the power to actually change a man's relationship with the Creator, what else does it have the power to do? What can it change in your life? But what say you? Are these reasons enough to make sure that freedom of religion actually stays a recognized natural right? Or does human dignity and human rights demand that it be squashed and shuffled off into the outer darkness? As always, let me know your thoughts, your ideas, your opinions down in the comment section below. Well, that about wraps up everything for right now, gang. As always, if you liked the video, whether you agreed with me or not, don't forget to show your support by giving it a like, leaving a comment, and sharing it on social media with your friends. And if you like videos about the culture, politics, and religion, but from a different POV, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for notifications, so you'll always know when I post new videos like this every Tuesday. Videos you're not going to want to miss. As always, thank you for watching, for giving me a little bit of your time. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed to the channel, and I will see you all again here next week, gang, on Top of the Stone. Ciao.